Earl Nightingale, who is one of my favorite people and experts, says that we have incredible untapped potential that we probably don't even, that we don't even realize. And so what we really want to do today is to help you explore that untapped potential. So let me see you by a show of hands. Who feels that you're the best you can be, or do you think that you have more potential that you haven't used? So who's the best you can be right now? Huh? You're the best you can be? Huh?
Right now.
For right now.
For right now.
Stephen, you're the best for right now. Right. At this moment. Yeah. And do you feel that you've got room for growth and more potential? Great. I always like to ask because I don't want to be talking to a room full of people who already feels they know all the answers, because I think it's it's an ongoing quest for improvement. But it's incredible to me to think that we are producing somewhere around 95 to 98% of our that we have untapped potential. So we've got an awful lot that we can accomplish. One of the things in my coaching that I find is that all too frequently we make the solutions to what we want to do too complex. I would hope that today what we're going to do is to simplify some ways for you to increase your potential and become more productive. The name of my company is Simply Successful, and I really do believe in that mantra. So there are some keys to what we're going to do. I'm basically just going to cover 4 topics, and Kathy will take you through several more. But the key to this whole thing is it's not that difficult to tie into that untapped potential. It's that sometimes we just make it more complicated than it needs to be. So one of my favorite authors, John Naisbitt, talked about in 1982, which is a little over 30 years ago, how we were going to get overwhelmed by this change to the information society, which is here now. There are some interesting things about that change that I think tie into this today. One of them is this, and I think you can all identify with this. The information society makes everything readily available to us, right? Everything is at our fingertips. As we get through this discussion this morning, we want to talk a little bit more about the profound impact that has on the way we get things done. And I won't dwell on that now because we'll cover it a little later on. So while the information society provides great benefits, it also has some risks, and we'll explore those risks a little bit here. So what Kathy and I did, we got together and we put together a plan that encompasses 5 puzzle pieces that will uncover what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to narrow it right down to those 5 things. I'm going to cover 2 of those things. The 2 things that I'm going to cover are habits and the impact that habits have on our productivity, and I'll also be covering self-discipline and the impact that has on our productivity. Kathy warned me that I cannot disclose the other 3 pieces to the puzzle, otherwise it wouldn't be a puzzle. So she's going to uncover those 3 pieces as she gets into her presentation. So as not to confuse you though, these are the 2 things. And when I talk about simple, it really is this simple. But we're going to focus on these two things. Most of you familiar with Michael Gerber. I think everyone has read Gerber's work. What I find interesting, and I hope you do too, it's been 25 years since Gerber talked about how important it is that we work on our business. Now it seems to me that since he disclosed that 25 years ago, we ought to be a little further ahead than we are now. So why do you think we've made such slow progress on this whole issue of working on our business? And I mean, it seemed pretty clear. Everybody talks about this book. Everybody's read it 6 times. Why have we made so little progress towards working on our business? What do you think? Anybody, any thoughts? Stephen?
I suspect that we still operate off of false thinking that we put into our brain that was told 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and we still hold those limited thoughts as being sacred and sanctified.
Yeah, and that's what we've got implanted up here in our brains, and we don't even realize it. Yeah.
What kind of cook did we don't know? You're gonna help us understand.
I hope that we're going to talk about that a little later on. Thanks, Stephen. Who else has any thoughts about why have we made such little progress? I think Stephen's point's a great one. Karen?
The habits.
Habits that we have, right? I mean, they're stuck into our head, and so we keep repeating, what's that old expression, keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting, right? And so we keep expecting different things even though we keep repeating those same habits. Anyone else, any thoughts around that, Karen?
I think it's a lack of focus. We're so distracted in this information age that it's difficult to concentrate and get things done.
Yeah. Every day it's another new thing to work on. And so, oh yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, when I get on the internet, it just makes me crazy because one thing leads to another thing. And the next thing I know, I'm playing a Connect-A-Dot game that I never intended to start, though. Lucy?
It's kind of ties on what she said. It's so easy to get, if you're a small business owner, sometimes you're forced into, if you don't have a big staff, you're forced into being reactive to what's going on, the latest email, the latest phone call, whatever,
Yeah.
because you don't have anyone to delegate it to, and you have to put out fires rather than plan strategically.
Yeah, so we're constantly playing catch up, right? We're always trying to catch up with what's going on. So, this is really, to me, this is sad. It is sad to me that 25 years ago, this guy recognized that we needed to make change, and yet 25 years later, we're still scrambling trying to figure that out. So today we're going to give you some very simple solutions, and I believe, I know they have changed my life. I'm always working on them to improve on them, but I think if you adapt some of these things, it can have the same effect on your business. So what we want to do today is to help you become that person that you're capable of becoming. We all recognize that we have potential that we can do. We just want to give you a few easy things that you can do that are not complicated, that can in many ways improve your productivity. So Earl Nightingale said that some of the greatest things that are available to us are free. And most small business owners struggle with having capital, being able to invest. I'd like to get that done, but I can't. I don't really have it. But yet people like Earl Nightingale claim that the greatest thing that we have available to us is free. What do you suppose that might be? What is it that's available to us that's free that we can use? John?
Well, there's a lot of information on the internet.
Okay.
You can access that's free.
Yeah. So there's that. Closer in though, what do you think that we have available to us? Yes.
I think a lot of times just thinking that we need something else to achieve what we want to, and really it's just about using what you already have to achieve your goals.
Yeah. So I believe that this to be the solution. It's said another way. I think you were saying it this way, but really it's we already have the solutions. We don't really need to look outside of where we already are. The question becomes, how do you go about using, and getting that done? So I want to talk a little bit about this, but fortunately for me, 20 years ago, I met Stephen Hager, who, if you get an opportunity and like to know more about what we're going to talk about today, I know about this much about the brain and neuroscience as Stephen does, but I wanted to simplify that for our purposes today because this isn't really a seminar on the brain. It's really on productivity. But this is the brain that's between our ears, right? This is referring to the brain between our ears. Do we have any other brain? Karen? The heart's a brain? Yeah. Is everybody aware that the heart is a brain and that the heart actually is considered a brain? Yeah. Karen, why do you say that? What purpose do you think your heart brain serves? Huh?
There's no heart math.
Okay.
Talk about the relationship between the brain and the heart.
Okay.
Another brain.
Yeah.
But probably that guy.
Yeah. So the heart brain is our moral compass.
Oh, I was thinking about that when I was thinking about
Yeah.
heart math.
Yeah. So, the heart brain provides a moral compass for us, but it is a brain, and it's important to recognize that. What do you think happens when our heart brain gets in conflict with our head brain? what do you think happens to us?
Heart wins.
Well, the heart's going to win, but do we get kind of out of sorts? Does it make us, when we find ourselves conflicted that way, does it make our lives complicated? Right? And so, and for today, this is not a discussion about the heart brain, but I think it's important that we recognize that there are two brains. And the other thing that I want to point out to you, that part of the brain is very emotional, right? And so sometimes we act out of emotion and we take reason away from all of that. So another way that we frequently get in conflict is when we have this conflict between what our neocortex, or the front part of our brain, gets into this discussion with our emotional brain, and that ends up in kind of a train wreck as well. So I only want you to be aware that it's a little bit more complicated than we really realize. There's the heart brain, there's the emotional brain, and it's important that that we manage all of this. So you have the neocortex, which is this part of the brain right up here, right? And then you have your emotional brain, and then you have reptilian brain, which is down here near the bottom part of our brain. And so what we're going to focus on today really, though, more is the neocortex and some of the characteristics of this part of the brain and how to make that work for you. So the brain operates like our computer hardware. Is it, just like we have a computer operating system? So the brain is our hardware. The information that goes into the brain is like our software, right? And it's where it's like our folders and files, if you will. And so that's the part of the brain where all of our information, much of it unbeknownst to us, goes in and gets stored. And it gets done without us thinking about it. And so it isn't any more complicated than that, but we really have those two things that we need to be thinking about. The interesting thing about the brain is it's like a muscle, and for it to do what we want it to do, we have to train it to do what we want it to do. All right? And so it doesn't like to be told what to do, and when we leave it to its own self, it's not going to act the way we want it to. So it's important to recognize that we can influence that, but we got to treat it just like any other muscle. John, you're going through a lot of rehab right now where you're having to rework your muscles. We don't often think of the brain as a muscle and something that needs to be trained and to do what we want it to do. And that's a lot really of what we're gonna talk about when it comes to habits and to self-discipline. So the faces of neurodiversity, and this really gets into Stephen's bailiwick, but these are just examples of our sensory and cognitive skills. You'll recognize those very much. But interestingly enough, we are all like a snowflake. Each one of us has our own individual makeup. None of us, has that same snowflake, and so we are all different. What we are mostly unaware of, though, that the brain data is embedded in us, creating our thoughts and behaviors without our knowledge. So what we say, how we act, all of those things are created for the most part, and they all have associated consequences. So while the brain is capable of questioning, left alone it will not. So it's just going to keep repeating what it repeats. So does that make sense? I mean, is that what you experience? The interesting thing about this to me is that we all have that same mechanism going on. So you can see why it's sometimes very difficult to make change and create new behaviors. Any questions about what I've presented so far around this? Stephen, do you have anything to add that I may have overlooked? No. Well, Stephen and I work very closely together, and I just tend to simplify what he has to say. But if you want to know more about this, that's your go-to guy. So what did I do? Well, first of all, when I wanted to put this presentation together, even though I have a lot of experience, I went to Stephen. Stephen and I had a couple of lengthy conversations about this. But these are also some people that I read. I can highly recommend all of these books. I think they are great authors. And one of the things that I did to reprogram my brain when I left corporate America and came to small business was through reading. And so how did I reprogram how I thought about things? As I came up with some great authors and read more about how folks like this, also saw things. But I can, and I love all of these because they're all an easy read. I mean, they are not complex and they're not difficult. But interestingly enough, I'm a student of this. They all tend to come back to the same place. Even though they go in separate directions, they tend to come back to the same place. And so one of the things that all of these well-known authors agree on is that the importance of changing behaviors to changing our thinking and rewiring our brain is critical. But if you read beyond what these guys say, and they go off in different directions, it still boils down to until you rewire your brain, right? And until you change your behaviors, you really haven't accomplished anything. And we're gonna dwell on that in a little bit here. But any questions or thoughts around that? Does this make sense to you? I mean, one of the things that I was concerned about when I was putting this presentation together, some of you may be going, yeah, I get this. Most of us probably get this. The problem is what are we doing about it? I don't think there's anything about this that's rocket scientists. It's rocket science. But how we handle it and how we manage it is really kind of critical. And that gets into the habits and the self-discipline. So this blew my mind when I realized that our subconscious mind is over 1 million times more powerful than our conscious mind. I'm like, wow, does that explain some stuff to me? Do I understand a lot more now about why I face some of the challenges that I do? But here's the thing, and this is another learning about the subconscious mind. It doesn't like vague stuff. It doesn't like it when you come to and say, I really want to be healthier. The brain's like, so what, right? It's just kind of like in one ear and out the other. So how we talk to the brain is critical to making the changes that we want to make. I want to say that again. How we talk to the brain is critical. When you talk to the brain in ways that the brain wants you to talk to it, what do you suppose you do? What are you doing? Are you reinforcing?
Reprogram.
Yeah, you're just reinforcing what the brain already knows. What do you do when you talk to the brain in ways that maybe it doesn't like, but you actually are working it in a way that the brain will change? Now you're helping to change the hard wiring. That's why I say this is not difficult, and in fact, it is a habit to be able to do this. There's just no doubt in my mind that, Stephen, over the years that I've gotten to know you, that unconsciously I have developed a habit of rewiring my brain. And so I'm just such a believer in a student of this. So who sets New Year's resolutions? Okay, yeah. So from those of you who have set New Year's resolutions, what kind of success have you had with them? Huh? So, Dan? Shaky. John? Yeah. Yeah, so does anyone have any successes with some New Year's resolutions? Has anyone had? John?
I always set a bunch of goals of, business, personal, things I'm going to do around my house, and gives me a target for achieving most of my.
So are you pretty successful with them?
Yeah, I would
Good,
say
good.
I hit them throughout the year.
I have a feeling that but you do it throughout the year?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're not going to set them and then start to try to do them all at one time.
No, I said, here's what I want to try to work to achieve, or what my patterns
Yeah.
are, and plot it out.
So for you, it's kind of a business plan, if you will. You're kind of putting a business plan together.
And I encompass my personal life, relationship,
Yeah.
everything.
The whole thing.
I've got different.
He's very disciplined.
Yeah, he is Mr. Discipline, as a matter of fact. Wouldn't you call him? Huh? So, yes,
Oh, I was just
Lucy.
gonna say what ties in with that is not just making a resolution, but making a plan with steps to fulfill it.
What do you think the brain thinks about you coming to it with a resolution? I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to reduce stress. What do you think the brain thinks about that based on what you've heard so far, Dan?
Concrete action steps. It wants it clearly delivered.
Yeah, the brain's really, you may not be listening, but the brain's really saying, I don't get that. I hear you, I know you want to accomplish that, but it doesn't resonate with me, right? So Dan, what could you do there to change that so that the brain might be more receptive to what you have to say to it?
Well, I have to give credit where credit's due. It's through your coaching, this has been very helpful.
Thanks. Yeah.
But it has been actually further distilling things down into action steps. And as you taught me, something simple, keep it simple, set those steps and just adhere to that and regularly check in and evaluate against those criteria.
Yeah. So getting it out of that vague place into some specific things. And I don't know that we know the problem with this. At least I didn't know, Stephen, until you and I hung around together, how this was all coming about. But I kept wanting to get things done. I was being too vague. But once I decided to be specific, it's amazing how things change. It's like like a switch was flipped. This is really important because I want to really dwell down on this. So if you've had bad success with New Year's resolutions, do you think that what you're probably doing is being a little too vague? I want to lose weight, right? I want to reduce stress, right? The brain isn't receptive to that kind of thing. So what if I said, I'm going to eliminate snacks in the morning? Is that something that you think the brain would probably be receptive to, right? Because, see, the brain doesn't want all this vague stuff. It wants to know, what do you want from me? Well, what I want to do is I want to stop eating snacks in the morning. So if I make my presentation to the brain in ways that's receptive to the brain, more than likely it's going to go into the storage area. I'm going to eliminate some old thoughts and I'm going to replace it with new ones. Questions or thoughts around this? Yes, Janice.
So your snack example.
Yes.
You have a negative in there. I don't want to eat. So is it better to say I do want to eat, let's say, healthy snacks or name the snacks that are on the good list? Assuming that, say, I'm one who doesn't eat a snack generally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
So
yes.
the positive versus the negative?
Positive reinforcement rather than negative, always better. Yes. Yeah. So specific, though, be clear with the brain that you know exactly what those specific things are. But yes, positive always better than negative.
Right here, if you say I don't want to eat, because I've heard before that it doesn't hear the negative. It just hears want to eat.
I think, Stephen, I'll ask your opinion on this. I think it's because the brain really wants to know what to do, not what not to do, I think. But, Stephen, any comments around that question?
I think you've got it nailed,
Oh,
100%, because if there's compelling reason and benefits, juice, great outcomes, value with them associated with it, you'll have 100% success. Without attaching an emotional value to it, you'll have 0%. So the brain will voluntarily engage in activities where you associate some value, some benefits to it. So positive visualizing. So if you spend more time up front to think about what's the value, how will I feel, what will other people think of me, how will I look, what values are, instead of jumping into the plan.
Okay.
If you do that first, the plans will come naturally, and then the value that you've reviewed in it will carry you through the day, and you'll do it as a habit.
Yeah, so now you know why I suggest you, if you want to know more,
So you
talk to Stephen.
100% on, and you're 100% on.
Fred.
I say we'll do more to avoid pain than seek pleasure. If it's framed in a way, if I keep eating those snacks, I'm not going to be able to move around, I'm going to have knee problems, whatever else attached to that. That'll help us, if you frame it that way versus I want to be thin.
Yes, yeah.
So we'll do more to avoid pain. I think it's going to seek pleasure.
Any other thoughts around this? So what I read about New Year's resolutions, and I think, John, you kind of hit on it, is it's great to have these resolutions, but it's something that you should be doing ongoing. It's something you want to do all during the year, right? And to just start them at the end of the year, there's no magic to that. But if you do that, create a plan, execute it over the year, and then present to the brain in ways that the brain wants to be presented to. These folks claim that you can improve by 50% the likelihood of you being able to accomplish something. It might be greater, but the number that I got was 50%. So for no cost, I can increase by 50% how I do things. That seems to me like to be a pretty good return, without having to invest anything. Right? Yeah, it is better. Lottery definitely better than the lottery. So, one of the first points I'd like to make is when you want to make change, are you thinking about a resolution or are you thinking about changing a habit? Two different things, right? So a resolution is vague. It's not real clear. It's not presented in a way that the brain likes it. A habit is presenting to the brain in ways that the brain's receptive to it, and you will likely increase the odds by 50% that you will get what you want. So that seems like a pretty good deal to me. Interestingly enough, 99% of the failures come from people who have the habit of making excuses. In my former life, I supervised a sales force of 100 people. The managers would get me involved when there was a performance problem with those salespeople. Almost always, first thing that was wrong is they didn't understand, the person who was having a performance problem didn't understand they had a performance problem. As I would dig deep into that, why was it? It's because they were all too busy excusing their performance. So near the end of my career, when I was in charge of these salespeople and I was conducting an interview and I found that somebody made excuses, my next thought was, who am I going to replace this person with? Because in all of my supervisory career, and I'm talking hundreds of people, hundreds of salespeople, I never once found someone who was going to excuse their behavior that would be successful. So that just says to me, we need to be, first of all, careful that we're not excusing things, but second of all, that we don't hang around people who do. Now, you may not be quite as harsh on that as I was, but I just find that the two are not congruent. Success and excuses they just don't. Karen.
Are excuses also from people that are victims, that is always outside of them, not them?
Yeah, that's been my experience. Yeah, it's never, in sales, that's most, Kenny, I'm sure you can identify with the world that you work in. It's never about them. It's about the economy. It's the products. It's right? You could probably name 100 reasons. You probably heard them all. And so how do you work your way through that, Kenny, because I think you said you have 60 reps that report to you?
You try to make it work with them as individuals, but sometimes you have to just cut and move on.
Yeah.
Help them find a new job.
Yeah, because in sales, if you can't be accountable, I believe that to be true of almost everything, but in sales, certainly you can't be if you're not accountable for it. So be aware of this issue of excuses and how that can affect what we do. So to further illustrate the thing about habits, why is it that habits die hard? Like you said, it's simple, right? Yeah, right. They're things that. But where did that come from? How did it get processed in there?
Do them all the time.
Right. You repeated it. It's the way you do it. It's the way you get dressed in the morning. It's the way you comb your hair. It's all of these little things that we do. Yeah, it's back into that software discussion that we talked about later on. So what have you done? What successes have you had when it comes to changing habits of your own? Any recent thoughts about some habits that you've been able to change? While you're thinking about that, I'll give you one of mine. So I was diagnosed with hiatal hernia because I would get heartburn all the time, and so I was diagnosed with that. So this is before I met Dan, but the doctor said, you know, what you're going to need to do is you're either going to need to cut back on coffee, orange juice, onions, and beer. You have to cut back on those 4 things, or I'm going to cut you from here to here. So, you know, all of a sudden I thought, you know, maybe I just need to get some new habits. You know, and I think someone said that earlier. All of a sudden the consequences for my behavior were quite clear to me. And so I just cut through those things like a hot knife through butter, with the exception of beer. I still do drink beer. But I don't eat raw onions, I don't drink orange juice, and I don't drink coffee. And I used to consume huge amounts of coffee at the time. So what would be some things that habits that you've managed to handle? Or where have you tried to change habits and not been successful? Karen?
You want me to share a story?
Yeah, please. Yeah, I think it's a very recent.
Yeah, so in June, I was diagnosed with sudden-onset diabetes, and similar to you, I had an outcome I didn't want, which instead of pills, I would have to give myself shots, and I'm a big baby, so I can't take shots at all. But what I learned, and I had to, give up like all the white stuff. But one of the things, and I was sharing this with Bill, is I also had to monitor my sugar twice a day. And between not wanting the shot and seeing my numbers go down, which for business, I really appreciated Bill and I talking about it, because I realized in business, as a solopreneur, I don't watch my numbers like I did when I had employees, a big staff, and worked for companies. My numbers were always important, just like my blood sugar numbers were important. So I think habits, when you have an outcome that you want, I didn't want the influence, what I wanted was the down pills or the off pills, and then looking at the numbers can help you create better habits.
Yeah, and that's been, how long have you been working on that? It's
Last
been,
June, I
yes,
went from
it's-
500
yeah,
to like 130.
yeah. I mean, life-changing, your life being threatened by all of that. And who else has had some examples of some, either, good success or bad success trying to change habits? Yes.
I am with the world's worst housekeeper. I have a lot of clutter in my house, and I've been trying to control that, and saying I will be tidier does absolutely nothing. Saying I will throw away 5 things a day does something.
Yeah.
It's slow, but it's getting something done.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
without getting a lot of emotional stuff, saying, oh, I have to save this thing. If I'm just throwing away 5 things a day,
Yeah.
I can find 5 things in the go.
Yeah, if you think about it, Lucy, you did exactly what we were talking about earlier. You talked to your brain in a very specific way that said, hey, I'm going to throw away 5 things a day. And apparently your brain liked that idea, and it responded well. How long have you been doing that?
For about a month and a half.
Okay. Why is it important that we do this over a period of time? There's something else about the brain. Fred?
Get the habit.
It's got to, right? You have to repeat it because you're trying to replace the old habit with a new habit. So repetition becomes critical, right? So repeating it really is an important, is an important part of that. Any questions around this? See, I think, if you think about it, there's really no reason to put up with a life that's not the life you want to live. It really can be relatively easy if we just develop the habit of focusing on this. So what is it that you do to quit procrastinating and replace dangerous habits? Karen, in your case, you had your back against the wall, so you didn't really have much of a choice.
This has nothing to do with that, but another way of keeping us on track, I think, is getting someone that you're accountable to, instead of just yourself.
Yes.
Give yourself, I'll do it later, or I'll get it in one, but if you have to tell somebody, especially when you're working with someone, Bill,
Yeah.
that I'm gonna have this by this day, this time. If you don't, then you're gonna disappoint yourself and the other person, and I think it's the other person who might more than yourself.
Yeah.
So the accountability of something that you need to do. Are you going to go in and see Dan? You want to make sure when he asks you about your eating, that you can say,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we want that, yes, please.
Oh, I was just gonna say, with any kind of goal that I've ever accomplished, especially the bigger ones, it's always, I have this intense urge to accomplish that. Like, I really, really want to do that. I put all my energy and effort and mental power towards that. And so.
So do you focus on like one thing then? Or is that
No,
when you
I
are,
make, lists of goals, like short-term goals and
Okay.
long-term goals, and then I just review that. So that's how I'm able to kind of, keep that top of mind. and
okay.
how much-
Let's table that for a minute because I'm going to talk about goals in just a second. So, thank you. So this whole thing about self-discipline and willpower, is it something that you think that we can all have? You think it costs extra money, or do you think it's something that we all have the capability of doing? Right? So again, for really no cost, we have the ability to, and I'm going to go over just three real quick, easy things that we can do. First one is, to your point, it's alarming to me to think that only 5% of the people have written goals. That means that 1 out of 20 people actually sits down and decides. And so I think you're one of those. We found one of those 20 people. But it's kind of startling to think about it. So when you think about goal setting, do you think about goal setting as something that you go do, or do you think about it as a process that you work through?
Process.
As a process. So tell us more about that, John.
Well, anything, I've always told my kids, set goals. I'm a big goal setter, because to me, it's better. You set a goal, if you just achieve 50% of it, that's better than 0% of never setting a goal.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
So at least have them out there and be working as a process to achieve it.
So you set a goal, you decide what you want it to be, then do you write it down?
Yeah, and you need to have a little plan, idea how you're going to achieve that.
Okay, and then what are you going to do? Are you going to work through the steps that you're going to do to achieve that goal?
Yes.
You're going to write those down too?
Yes.
Right, yeah. So what's happening based on what we were talking about earlier when you do that? What's going on in your brain at that time? Does the brain like this kind of treatment? It's like, wow, this is cool. I mean, it's not really happening, but it's, in our mind, the brain's going, yeah, this is the way I want to be treated. I want to know what you want. I want to know how you're going to do it, right? And I don't want it to be vague. So why do you suppose only 5% of the population writes goals? Why do you suppose that is, Fred?
Well, one would be a fear of failure.
Yeah, like I can't do it, like I might,
right,
yeah,
goal is great,
yeah,
but
yeah.
Beat yourself up when you don't make it.
Yeah. What a paradox that is if you think about it, right? Yeah, Stephen.
It could be that their habit is not to.
Further explain.
Their
Yeah.
habit is not to do it. They haven't done it before.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah,
So it's a good
yeah,
habit.
yeah. So I have the habit of not setting goals, therefore, I won't continue to set goals.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, when I'm setting goals that I find I don't accomplish, I'm like, I think of something, like I say, but then I'm like, oh yeah, I'll remember that I want that. Like, so I don't have to write it down. I'll remember that I want to be better and have a better.
Well, we're too busy, right? We got all these things, got all these balls that we're trying to balance, and so we don't stop to take the time and go, okay, well, I'm going to write this down and change it. Karen.
Well, when I was in school, they didn't teach this. They didn't teach goal setting. You had
Yeah.
assignments, you didn't have goals. I think a lot of it is, we weren't taught how to,
Yeah, so it really, from the very beginning, we really got off on the wrong foot.
unless they were raised with John,
Yeah, unless they happen to have that from a parenting standpoint. I think I saw it. Lucy.
I think one reason why people might not write goals is because you have in your mind that I've written it down, it's cast in stone, and that was a block for me, but I found out, write my goals, try to accomplish them, and then revise them if if circumstances change. That's still accomplishing a goal, you're just learning from your mistakes and trying to accomplish it in a different way.
With all of the business owners that I work with, and I work almost exclusively with business owners, they don't do this. Yeah. Most business owners that I work with do not do a good job on this. So think about it. Aren't most business owners kind of entrepreneurial oriented, right? Grew up in the business, didn't necessarily have a lot of corporate kind of thinking. A lot of business owners think this is kind of corporate, This is too corporate for me. Yeah, well, if making more money is too corporate for you, but I mean, this is something that really most business owners, they want to be out there. They want to be thinking in big terms, and so we need to be careful that we're doing a good job on this. But it's because it's the beginning, really, of getting us down the right track. Any questions around goal setting? Who thinks they're really a good goal setter here? Pretty good? So this is one area where we can leave here today. You can, put that on that list that Cynthia was talking about. And this if you can make this a new habit, if you didn't do anything else as a result of this, but just set the habit of becoming a really good goal setter, I think it could change a lot in our lives. So the second point is about making the right choices. There is a term that I like to use. It's called discernment, D-I-S-C-E-R-N-M-E-N-T, discerning about what the right choice is. But what I frequently find in my working with people is that we don't necessarily think things through to what the ultimate outcome might be if we make a choice. Now, where do you think the internet comes in on this issue? Does the internet get us to really pause and think about things in deep ways, or is it like moving along, it's fast, and there's a lot going on, right? So there's a choice I can make. Here's a choice I can make. Here's a choice I can make. So do you see how the internet can kind of work against us when it comes to making right choices?
Too many shiny objects to grab.
Yeah, man, you look at all these, I'm going to do this. Yeah. So here's a thought for you. If you don't intend to finish something, don't start it. I mean, really, Fred, I have to tell you, it was a revelation to me, because I found myself with all of these half-finished things, And so now and I know with the people I work with sometimes, like with Cynthia, it can make them crazy, because she wants me to work on this, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to work on that right now. I didn't finish this, right? Truth, Cynthia?
Yes.
Right? And so, if you're gonna start something, then it's important that you finish it. So is being unhealthy a choice?
Yes.
Right? So again, if we decide that we want to become healthy, we can make the choice to become healthy, and then we can tell the brain, here are the steps that I'm going to take to become healthy. And now we know that the odds are 50% that we can become healthier if we take that approach. All right? So this whole idea of making good choices is critical. So one of the things that I see a lot of is we love the gratification that occurs in our lives today. We go, we try something, it's all instant gratification. This stuff we're talking about today, do you think it's got instant gratification in it? Or does it require a lot of hard work, a lot of repetition, but if you think about it, where's the payback? Is the payback greater to accept these things that are out there with this, oh, do this, do this, do this, or taking the time, think about things more deeply, and then go about change in the right way? Which do you think is the best and I'm not saying that maybe a combination of the two, but I just wanted to point out to you, this is more difficult than I think it has ever been in my lifetime. Because it's all out there. I mean, there's just so much that we need to be aware of. Also, first things first. The very best first things first thing I've ever seen is the pickle jar. Who's familiar with the pickle jar? Okay. Do yourself a favor, if you haven't seen it, go to the internet. This is one of those things where the internet really does work for you. Google pickle jar and better understand what the pickle jar means. It just takes you through setting big rocks, small rocks, pebbles, water. It could be a whole separate presentation. But this idea of first things first, this is what I tell people when I'm coaching them. It looks to me like you're trying to keep up, right? I mean, most of us are trying to keep up with what's going on. I just look people right in the eye and I tell them, you know what? It's not going to happen. Will Hankey and I have that discussion all the time, you know, because Will's got all of these things he's trying to work on. The key is not keeping up. Ain't going to happen. And I believe the best thing to do is just give up on the fact that we're trying to keep up and just do a great job of deciding what you're going to do. First thing I decide is what I'm not going to do. I am not going to do this. And then when I start sorting that out, then I try to focus on what's left over. But that, you know, that really works well for me, so. Also, taking personal responsibility for what's going on. This is so critical that we see ourselves as being personally responsible for our destiny. It's not somebody else out there. You know, advertising today makes me crazy because it shows you all this whole life that you probably can't afford, but would love to live. You know, and when we begin to look inside of ourselves and take personal responsibility, it's a life changer. But it's interesting to me that 85% of people do not take personal responsibility for their well-being. So just to close, what we want to do is to focus on the carrot, not the stick. I think you mentioned that earlier. Let's reward ourselves for the things that we do well. Let's set some benchmarks. Let's set some, you know, hey, here are the steps that I'm going to take in order to do this, and then reward ourselves along the way. And more than likely, as we celebrate our successes, we will become increasingly successful, and we'll eventually. So it's not really a complicated thing. The other thing is focus on the present. I don't know if you spend much time thinking about the past and the future, but I you know, to me, there is so much going on. If we're just be in the moment, if we could just be in the moment and not worry so much about, oh, I tried to do that and that didn't work out. You know, that happened and, you know, well, I didn't do that. Or, gee, I got all of these things, and we worry about what might happen and all that. I'm a great worrier. I mean, I worry like crazy. But most of the time, it ends up I'm wasting my time. So, you know, if we just live in the moment, I think we'll have a much, much better life. Lastly, you probably aren't thinking about this, but there's a bad wolf and a good wolf on each of our shoulders. And we all have these little voices inside of our heads that say, oh, you know, that's really a good idea. Oh, that's really a bad idea. And so we have these discussions with ourselves. There's an old Indian saying around this, the younger Indian saying to the older Indian, you know, do you pay attention to the bad things that happen, the negative things that happen, or do you pay attention to the good things that happen? What happens in your life? And the old Indian chief said, it depends on which you feed. So if we feed the negative things in our life, if we feed those things and we give our brain those things that are not good for us, what do you think is going to happen, right? On the other hand, if we have the power of positive thinking and we think about the positive things we can do in our lives, you know, good things that happen. So we are in effect able to control that in our own lives. So I think, are we just about up, Cynthia? Are we just about out of time?
We have about 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Any questions about any of this? You see what I mean, though, about how simple this really is? I mean, I tried to keep it manageable. You know, it's really just 4 things, right? It's just setting good habits as opposed to resolutions, right? You know, so, you know, hopefully do a good job on that. You're setting goals, setting written goals. You do it as a process, you know, so if you do that well, if you take responsibility for, you know, for your actions, and you stay positive about what you're doing, more than likely you're going to significantly increase. And these guys say 50% improvement. So thoughts around any of that? Is this all doable? Is it something that you want to commit to today? Right? Yeah, because this is free. I mean, you know, if you think about it, there's nothing that we talked about today that costs you a dime. All you have to do is just develop those new habits. So thank you. It's been great talking with you guys, and good luck. Yeah, thank you.